When Phil Kessel arrived in Toronto in 2009, the future appeared bright but tentative for the Maple Leafs. Yes, they hadn't made the playoffs since the 04-05 lockout and had finished last season with a disappointing 34-35-13 record. They were only a couple of years removed from back-to-back 9th place finishes just outside the playoffs. 9th. Fucking come on. That's the definition of being stuck in hockey purgatory. Those teams were full of wily vets who just couldn't put it together and were frustrating to watch, but were pretty dope in NHL 06. And maybe most importantly, John Ferguson Jr., author of some of the worst trades, drafts, and seasons in Maple Leafs history, was in the past, and all Leafs fans were sleeping a little easier with Brian Burke at the helm. I fucking hated John Ferguson Jr. Phil Kessel had even overcome cancer a few years prior, illustrating the resilience this Leafs team needed to jump back into contention. Phil is a simple man. He loves hockey, fishing, a crisp can of Coke, and winning. And probably his family. As a player and as a Leaf, he was awesome. An electrifying player who put Toronto's offense on his back for years. He is the physical embodiment of the Leafs era from 2009 to 2015, and also one of the many reasons it was fucking fun. A team that could get it going for stretches, long enough to stir belief in the fan base before ultimately crashing out in spectacular ways. It was a roller coaster. An absolute blast of a roller coaster that was undoubtedly fun, even though they didn't win anything. Alright, it was pretty sad too. These years for the Leafs teased progress, hope, all of the things fans were desperately wanting. Damn it, we just wanted to get back in the playoffs. And they did. That infamous series against the hated Boston Bruins produced a massive collective shit uttered across the GTA and proved to be this team's high watermark. Everything they had been working hard to achieve cruelly turned into a meme that Leafs players and fans have had to endure in the years since. But despite the disappointments, these Leafs produced the best individual player point totals since Matt Sundin was going off in the 90s and accumulated a team of characters that left their mark on the city despite never getting out of the first round. This Leafs era spectacularly failed to launch, but they had some damn good fun along the way. It's 2009 and Brian Burke had just completed his first offseason as the Leafs general manager, and it was clear he was eager to make his mark on the team. The guy was busy. Burke had recently GM'd the Anaheim Ducks to their first and only Stanley Cup, and also helped revive the Vancouver Canucks in the late 90s and early 2000s, as they successfully brushed off the Messier era. His drafting of both Sedins and Ryan Kesler was legendary, and he was ready to take on the challenge of managing this team in hockey's most rabid market. The money probably also helped. And Burke knew what he was in for. I mean, check this quote. Burke was hired in November of 2008, but waited and assessed the team for about a month and a half before making any moves. He was tasked with rebuilding this old, slow Leafs team, something they had been struggling with thanks in part to the Frozen 5 players who refused to waive their no-trade clauses at the 2008 deadline. This wasn't a scorched earth rebuild, that would come later. No, this was closer to a retooling. Burke and head coach Ron Wilson wanted the Leafs to be bigger and tougher to play against so they'd be ready when they make the playoffs. Solid reasoning at the time. Fans had had enough of this, so everyone knew it was time to flip to the next chapter and burn this fucking book in the process. Yeah, those years just felt doomed. It probably wasn't all on you, Toskala, but that goal was. The real work began in the summer. Burke started off by drafting promising center Nazem Kadri with the Leafs' 7th overall pick. With 78 points in 56 games and another 21 in 14 playoff games for the London Knights, Kadri was a great pick, but it would take time and a few years to reach the show full-time. This was a sparkly draft pick though, and it kicked off a summer full of acquisitions. Next, he signed Mike Komisarek off of the rival Montreal Canadiens and Francois Beauchemin, formerly of Burke's Anaheim Ducks. Two rock-solid defenders who would play physical and add that toughness Burke was seeking to infuse. Beauchemin even had a Stanley Cup ring to boot. The toughness theme continued with the trade for Garnet Exelby, who had 7 assists, 120 penalty minutes, and 151 hits for the Atlanta Thrashers the year prior. The cost? Pavel Kubina. a 40-point defenseman in 08-09, but one who had injury issues in the past and clearly didn't mesh with Burke's Leafs. His $5 million could be better used elsewhere. The Leafs also had Luke Schenn, their big 4th overall pick from 2008, who was entering his 2nd season with a big club, after a rookie year that showed promise. And number 2 feels like the perfect defenseman number, so that helps. The Leafs also landed one of the biggest fish of the 2009 offseason, not named Phil Kessel, future potential Vezina contender Jonas Gustafsson, who had just put up some sparkling numbers in the Swedish Elite League. He was expected to come in and tear the starting job away from the struggling Vesatoskala, but a 1A, 1B situation was also possible. And now Burke's big swing, the trade for the man to replace Matt Sundin's high-end skill, Phil Kessel. Phil the fucking thrill, baby. Fresh off a 36-goal, 60-point season for the Boston Bruins, which included 6 goals and 11 points in 11 playoff games, Burke saw this deal as a way to add a game breaker to the lineup. This guy was really cooking up something. Yeah, the Leafs traded their 2010 and 2011 first-round picks as part of the package to acquire him, but they're going to be good now, thanks to all these roster additions. Burke then signed Kessel to a shiny new 5-year, $27 million contract. Oh yeah, Burke also signed tough guy Colton Orr to add more truculence to the lineup. He racked up 193 penalty minutes for the Rangers this season prior. This was a fun offseason, full of additions to a Leafs roster that still included elite powerplay QB Thomas Kaberle, big Ukrainian Alexei Ponikarovsky, Mikhail Grabovski, Jason Blake, Nikolai Kulemin, and Matt Stajan. These guys are ready to rock. When the season began, these Leafs were bright, bushy-tailed, and full of hope. Kessel was out, still recovering from off-season shoulder surgery, but the team just needed to tread water until their new star could debut. But they didn't tread. No, they drowned. 0-7-1. Just a miserable start. These hot new Leafs failed to record a win in their first 8 games and were an abysmal 1-7-4 by the time Phil Kessel made his Leafs debut on November 3rd, 2009. Just a month into this fresh season, and the writing was on the wall. The Leafs just never got it going this season in any regard at all. Their 14% power play was atrocious and last in the league, as was their revamped 74% penalty kill. In fact, they earned the rare distinction of finishing last in both special teams categories, something that only 2 other teams have done since 2000. I remember watching these games, and yeah, they were that bad. And that goalie battle between Gustafsson and Toskala culminated in a combined .888 save percentage. Bad stuff. Gustafsson actually cracked .900, but his play didn't inspire any confidence, and his penchant to play the puck caused heart rates to spike across the GTA whenever he left his net. Burke did manage to move on from Vesatoskala and Jason Blake's hefty contract in January in a trade for legendary goaltender J.S. Jaguar. But the season was over in November, so this was a move squarely focused on next year. Jiggy did put up a .916 save percentage for the Leafs over the remainder of the season, so great job, dude. And on the same day, the Leafs also traded for future captain Dion Phaneuf for a bag of regulars. Double Dion. This trade actually looks really good in retrospect. Berkey was working the phones that day. By the end of the year, the Leafs had won 30 games and lost 52, though 14 of those were in OT. Good enough for last place in the Northeast Division and 15th in the Eastern Conference. Only the Oilers were worse, but they at least had a number 1 overall pick to look forward to. The Leafs would have had number 2 overall, but that was owed to the Bruins, who landed future star Tyler Seguin. Funny stuff. To be honest, there was nothing fun about this season other than Phil Kessel's debut and Phaneuf's debut. But the new additions performed admirably, and NCAA free agent signing Tyler Bozak made his entrance. So there were some good times down the stretch. Alright, on to the next season, which will be much better. The Leafs clearly had a lot of issues to address this offseason. And after spending so much money last offseason trying to address the team's defensive woes, Burke decided to add more offensive pop to the roster. Enter Chris Versteeg, trusty vet Colby Armstrong, another fighter Mike Brown, and Clark MacArthur, who joined his 2005 World Juniors teammate Dion Phaneuf. After the Thrashers decided not to sign him to the contract awarded to him in arbitration. I don't think this happens very often. With some fresh blood added to the mix and the expected development of their young players, these Leafs believed they might be ready to challenge for a playoff spot, especially if their big defenseman signings from a year ago could, well, defend better. Do it for Jiggy and the Monster, guys. The team also had a new leader as well. Dion Phaneuf was named the 18th captain in team history, taking over a position that had been vacant since Matt Sundin went west. This season actually got off to a fantastic start. The Leafs started off hot, winning their first 4 games, which included a 4-3 win against the vaunted New York Rangers, led by the handsomest goalie around. It was a promising start that had Leafs fans starting to quietly whisper, "Could we make the playoffs?" I was one of those fans. High school Jake let his hopes grow wildly out of control. This is the kind of fun I'm talking about. But my hopes were dashed as quickly as a farmer's wrap and iced coffee go through me, fast as hell. Cue a 1-8-2 record over the next month that sewered the Leafs and led to them sitting 6 games below 500 at the end of the calendar year. Then, from the seemingly hopeless ashes of this season, a savior emerged. A beautiful man of God who consecrated the Air Canada Centre. The David chosen to face off against Goliath. In this case, the Leafs' dwindling playoff odds. And boy did he show up. Reimer ripped the starting goalie job out of Jiggy and Gustafsson's hands in the second half of the season as he helped propel the Leafs on an unexpected playoff push. He went 20-10-5, and it was integral to the hot Leafs team going 17-7-5 in February and March. He played every game in March, and his .921 save percentage was the highest recorded by a Leafs tendy since Ed Belfour. Optimus Rhymes' run here was special, and it helped that the rest of the team was beginning to gel in front of him. Phil the Thrill led the team in points, notching 32 goals and 32 assists while playing all 82 games. And the newly assembled line of MacArthur, Grabowski, Kuhlman lit it up, all hitting career highs in points. Longtime Leaf Thomas Caberlet finally found his way out of town after years of rumors as he joined the Bruins. Weird. And Christopher Stieg only played 50 games before being shipped off for picks. Burke also called time of death on the Francois Beauchemin experiment, returning him to Anaheim for Band-Aid Joffrey Lupul and Jake Gardiner, whose signing with the Leafs was not a certainty, in a move that was largely viewed as a cap dump at the time, but turned out to be one of Burke's brightest trades for the Leafs. Lupul immediately jumped into the lineup and hit the ground running, notching 18 points in 28 games. Ultimately, the team came up short in their hunt for the playoffs for the 6th straight year, and didn't come particularly close, finishing 37, 34, and 11, 10th in the East. But Phil Kessel did kick off his record-breaking Ironman streak this year, which is pretty cool, and their second half improvement was tangible, providing a ray of hope that this team was coming together. Their offense was finally clicking, the defense hitting its stride, and they had a young star goalie who proved he could handle the harsh spotlight in Toronto's crease. Phaneuf wasn't hitting the points totals he had reached in Calgary, but his leadership was felt in the locker room, and those points and big slappers would probably come at some point. The vibes were good. Burke just needed to continue building. Feeling the heat after losing another top 10 pick to the Bruins, Burke promised the Leafs faithful that he was going to trade up in the first round to land a difference maker. And he did. One of those things. At the draft, Burke traded the 30th and 39th picks to Anaheim. Again, man, he must know someone there. All the way up to 22, where Toronto drafted big greasy American winger Tyler Biggs. A power forward who played the physical game that Burke's management team loved, Biggs never cracked an NHL roster and put up 15 points in 108 games for the Marlies. The Ducks made out like bandits in this trade, drafting Ricard Raquel with the 30th overall pick and John Gibson with the 39th pick. 2 great NHLers. And while it's no guarantee that the Leafs would have made the same picks, it still doesn't feel great. Toronto also drafted Stuart Percy 25th, who also did not ever make the team. But Burke continued to be active in the free agent market this offseason, signing number 1 center Tim Connolly to a 2-year deal. A rangy center with soft hands and amazing playmaking, Connolly also struggled with injuries throughout his career, so Burke and Wilson were hoping for a bounce-back season. The Leafs also added some offensive juice to their blue line, trying to replace what they lost in Caberlet. Enter John Michael Lyles and Cody Franzen. Franzen was especially interesting to Burke due to his 6'5" frame. Lyles was on the smaller side at 5'10", but he had 3 over 40-point seasons in Colorado and, could quarterback an NHL power play. Speedster Matthew Lombardi also arrived in the Cody Franzen trade, and Burke acquired Dave Steckel, 2 guys to add depth to the Leafs' bottom 6. Kadri was knocking at the door after almost going point per game for the Marlies, but he spent most of the 10-11 and 11-12 seasons going up and down between the AHL and NHL. Jaguar also left town, leaving the crease in the steady and unsteady hands of Reimer and Gustafsson. Overall, the vibes from last season's strong finish carried over. NBC Sports even said that maybe Toronto will win enough games to end its postseason curse. You know, realistic goals. In the same article, they also said that this was a best-case scenario. Do with that what you will. And again, these Leafs knew how to start a season out on the right foot, winning 7 of the first 10 games and finishing October top of their division and second in the East. The line of Kessel, Bozak, Lupul was absolutely popping off, as the 23-year-old Kessel led the league in points and goals at the same time. Feel the fucking thrill, baby! They kept the good times rolling into December this time, amassing an 18-13-4 record by Boxing Day 2011. Sitting in a playoff position, Berkey decided the time was ripe to extend his pal Wilson for all his hard work. Yeah, his Leafs hadn't made the playoffs in 3 years, but they were in a playoff position now, and these guys go way back. Then, the predictable happened. Reimer went down with an injury after starting the season 4-0-1, and Gustafsson played decently for a while, but just couldn't keep the good times rolling like our favorite Transformer. Reimer missed 19 games with a team called Whiplash, but was actually a concussion according to the rumor mill. He then struggled upon his return and didn't really get going again until March, which was too late. Another dreadful penalty kill also dragged the team down, worse than the NHL again. Then regression hit the Kulemin, MacArthur, Grabovski line hard. All 3 slumped, especially Kulemin, who only scored 7 goals after a 30-goal outburst the year prior. And after struggling through a few months of the season, a stretch of losing 10 and 11 killed off the freshly extended Ron Wilson, who was replaced by former Ducks coach and other Burke buddy Randy Carlyle. And the team didn't improve at all, not even a dead cap bounce. Wilson actually finished with a more respectable record than Carlyle did that year. Once again, this team finished on the outside looking in, settling in at 13th in the East, a full 12 points out of the playoffs. Harsh vibes, but they also overshadow an admirable resurgence season from Joffrey Lupul, who notched 67 points in 66 games and scored some wicked goals. He didn't quite shake the Band-Aid rep, but this is a strong year from him that earned him an All-Star nod. Our boy Phil also hit his first of 4 point-per-game seasons, 2 with the Leafs, 2 with the Pens. This line was absolutely buzzing this year, and the Leafs finished the year with 231 goals, good for 6th in the East. But they allowed 264, second worst in the East. That's a theme present throughout these years, a good offense being totally let down by their defense and goaltending. Jake Gardiner also emerged with a promising rookie season, scoring 30 points in 72 games in a sheltered role. Defensive miscues harmed his overall game, but he was only 22. Oh, and Connolly also only produced 36 points in a relatively healthy 70 games. His is a sad story. A promising career robbed by 2 diagnosed concussions, hip surgery, 2 cracked vertebrae, a broken rib, a leg stress fracture, a bad shoulder, and assorted other injuries. Unfortunately, this was his only year for the Leafs, as the team waived him in January of 2013 prior to the start of the lockout-shortened season. Another year of hope up in smoke in the big smoke. Moving on to the 2012-2013 season, the labor dispute between the NHL and the Players Association got ugly and wiped out the first half. A new deal was then tentatively agreed upon on January 6, 2013. I remember I was taking a shit in my dad's carpeted bathroom when this news was announced, so I really needed it. With the new CBA agreed upon, the league's teams began to prep for a 48-game season. And the Leafs? They started prepping too, by firing Brian Burke just days before they opened training camp. To be fair, this had been rumored for months prior, due to some alleged misbehavior, and was likely delayed due to the Leafs' ownership change and the aforementioned lockout. In this awkwardness, Burke actually managed the Leafs during the offseason and didn't just sit on his hands. First, he cut ties with the Monster, sending him to the peg for a bag of pucks on June 22, 2012. That same day, he drafted Morgan Rielly 5th overall. Nowadays, Rielly is the longest tenured Leafs player by far. Then the next day, he sent former number 4 overall pick Luke Shen to the Philadelphia Flyers for former number 2 pick James Van Riemsdyk. Yes, it's a 1-for-1. His only other big move before getting fired was bringing in face-off and penalty kill specialist Jay McClellan on a 2-year deal, adding some much-needed defensive acumen to the roster. Fast forward to January, the Leafs brass tapped Dave Nonis, second in command to Burke for most of his career, and who also replaced him in Vancouver, to step up into the GM role. Nonis, second cousin Darren Dreger, but only half as insufferable, is a hockey man through and through, and held a similar vision to Burke's version of the Leafs. So, it was a relatively clean break for a team that was hoping to finally break through this year. One of the GM's first moves was claiming Fraser McLaren off waivers from the San Jose Sharks. This beast of a man was an enforcer in the purest sense of the word. Great in the ring, but not very useful on the ice. And he was also somehow 24 years old. Burke and Nonis collected enforcers like they expected to go up against the Broad Street Bullies. Steady, defensive-minded Mark Fraser cracked the Leafs roster after impressing Carlisle and fought 9 times. A figure that would lead most NHL teams, but was only 3rd on the Leafs. To be fair to Fraser, it's hard to win this stat when you're on the same team as Colton Orr and Fraser McLaren. They even had Mike Brown on the team until they shipped him off to Edmonton. And newcomer Leo Komarov wasn't much of a fighter, but he did embody the grind set. Pugilism, toughness, fists of steel. This team had it all in spades. But did they have enough actual skill? Well, Nonis signed Lupul to a huge extension on January 20th. Good for Lupul too, because he found himself in the way of a Dion slap shot only 3 days later that broke his arm. But the Leafs not only survived without Lupul in the lineup, they thrived. Winning 26 games and breaking their cursed 9-year playoff list streak in the process, albeit in a shortened season. Lupul still managed to put up 18 points, including 11 goals in 16 games, and his teammates stepped up in his absence. Our boy Phil led the way, of course. He notched 52 points in 48 games. Reimer and Skirvins proved to be a solid tandem in net. Kadri broke out with 44 points, and JVR had a great debut season in the blue and white. Yes, there was some luck involved, but Carlisle's strategies are designed to win hockey games, not the Corsi spreadsheets, you fucking nerds. And the city of Toronto was rabid for its first taste of the playoffs in almost a decade, against their hated black and yellow foes no less. It was a classic Eastern Conference quarterfinal against fellow Original Six franchise, the Boston Bruins. The Bruins had won Lord Stanley only 2 years prior, and these prideful Bruins were eager to show the world that their first-round exit to Alex Ovechkin's Washington Capitals in 2012 was a fluke. It's hard to believe now, but this series was the first time these two had met in the playoffs since 1974, a series which the Bruins swept. These Bruins were good too, but their offense stalled down the stretch, and the Boston Marathon bombings hung over the hurting city and franchise the whole year. They dipped in the standings after a torrid start, and this matchup was born. The Bruins raced out to a 3-1 series lead and looked like the better team in the process. Lupul had a beautiful 2-goal game that helped the Leafs win Game 2. But David Krejci, Milan Lucic, Patrice Bergeron, and Zdeno Chara looked dominant, and the Leafs were staring down a disappointing early exit after Game 4. And it didn't help that a young Brad Marchand was being himself. But it wouldn't be like these Leafs teams to fade silently into the night. No. Their motto is to dig deep and give the fans a sense of hope. Something to believe in. Something enough to distract themselves from the mundanity of life before failing and crushing everyone foolish enough to buy into them for even a moment. They needed to make it fun. Cue consecutive 2-1 wins, one in Boston and one in Toronto, where Kessel and Captain Dion scored the clutchest goals of their Leafs careers, forcing a Game 7 at TD Garden that promised salvation for one team and just regular business for the other. Unfortunately for the young Leafs, these Bruins knew how to win Game 7s. But a tight first period showed this was anybody's game as the teams left the ice tied at 1. Then Cody Franzen scored his second of the game in the second period to put the Leafs up 1 after 40 minutes. Kessel and Kadri then added on to that lead early in the third as the speedy Leafs continued to own the momentum. The Bruins looked like they were out of gas. This was a veteran team that had played a lot of hockey and won a lot of hockey over the last few years, and it looked like this fast, plucky Leafs team finally had their number. And they did. The Leafs closed out Game 7 and delivered the most inspiring message Toronto fans had ever known. He delivered on his promise. Toronto entered a golden age, and Vancouver residents even stopped saying on terrible for a few weeks. No, Nathan Horton started Boston's rally by finishing off this tidy rush play. Then Lucic stuffed home a Chara rebound to cut the lead to 1, before Bergeron took advantage of a great Chara screen to tie the game with 50 seconds left. I mean, Chara just manhandled Dion here. And honestly, at this point, all the fun was sucked out of the building and the GTA. Every fan had that sick feeling that they knew what was going to happen, and they were right. Bergeron scored the winner and put Toronto's 2013 playoff run to the sword. A historic collapse. Another 18-wheeler going off of a cliff, or maybe a war rig running out of fuel in the wastes. It just seemed like we ran out of gas, said Toronto coach Randy Carlyle. Yeah, it was painful as all hell, but after a few weeks, months, it was possible to rationalize that this was a painful start to a competitive Leafs era. These guys forged their first playoff run together in the Hells, so maybe they would have the fire and gall to break through next year. I mean, this team was young, and now they had to be full of piss and vinegar, right? Riding high off of their surprise playoff appearance, the Leafs are ready to buy and bolster their still improving roster. Reimer was mostly great in the playoffs, but it was also true that he was a bit of an injury bug and could struggle at times. And with Nonis not trusting Ben Scrivens as far as he could throw him, the time was now to add another tendy. So he called up the LA Kings and tore Jonathan Bernier away from his probably stunning oceanside home surrounded by porn stars and actresses, sending Matt Fratton, Scrivens, and a second-round pick, along with some cash the other way. Bernier had some productive years backing up Jonathan Quick, and had been agitating for a move, so this was his chance to challenge for real playing time. He got off on the right foot by fighting Ryan Miller in a preseason game, and probably won the starting role due to the resulting vibes. At the 2013 NHL entry draft, Nonis made another swing. This time for two-time Cup winner Dave Bolland, who had just scored the Cup-winning goal a week earlier to secure Chicago its second championship in 4 years, but who now had to make some cost-cutting measures as this wagon got more expensive the more they won. A glitzy addition in the Cup winner sense, Bolland was a no-frills center who excelled at defense but also had trouble staying healthy. Nonis sent a second and 2 fourth-rounders to the Blackhawks in exchange. Then the big one. On the first day of free agency 2013, Nonis geared up and went big fish hunting. And he landed one, even though it might have been already dead and rotting, signing David Clarkson to a 7-year, $36.75 million contract. A massive commitment considering his career high in points was 46, but Clarkson played the physical hockey that was needed to succeed in the playoffs. It is my belief that the Clarkson signing was a harbinger of doom for the Leafs' 2013-2014 season. Yes, he had scored 30 goals 2 years ago, but he had vastly outperformed his underlying metrics en route to his career year, like somebody else in the room. The best part? His agent negotiated a contract that was practically impossible to buy out. He earned his percentage here. And to make room for Clarkson, Nonis bought out the remaining 4 years and $22 million on Mikhail Grabovski's contract, who had fallen out of favor last season and was sometimes even deployed on the fourth line by Carlyle, who also let Clark MacArthur walk to the rival Ottawa Senators in free agency. After this Nonis offseason, Burke looks like a complete visionary. But Nonis was somewhat vindicated, at least at first. The Leafs once again got off to a hot start, going 10-4 to start the year. It's so classic and honestly a sick and twisted thing to do. But the team was playing well. Bernier and Reimer started the year battling for the starter's role, but Bernier's superior play earned him the majority of starts as the year progressed. Phil the Thrill started hot as well, on his way to another 80-point season, showing that he deserved the massive extension he signed before the first puck drop of the season. Bozak and JVR were having career years. Dion was playing his physical brand of hockey and leading the team mentally, even though his offense still hadn't reached the productivity he achieved in Calgary. So overall, the team was playing well. Good enough to be sitting at 21-16-5 after winning the Winter Classic against Detroit on New Year's Day 2014. Good enough for 5th in the East. Qualifying for the playoffs the second year in a row looked to be in the cards, and Dion got rewarded with a big extension for his efforts. But cracks loomed under the surface. The team was still allowing far too many scoring chances, and some key players were struggling to produce. Bolland missed most of the year with an ankle injury. Clarkson never got going after starting the year with a huge suspension. Kuhlman completely lost the ability to score. Kadri regressed after a breakout year. And Reimer never got going. Even Lupul was failing to live up to his new contract. But still, on March 13th, 2014, they sat third in the East despite a negative goal differential in the year. But points banked are points banked. And the Leafs just needed to close the year with some consistency to bring the playoffs back to Canada's largest city again. And this is when it started. Another infamous Leafs choke job. Bernier, the man who had been carrying this Leafs defense on his back for months now, went down with injury. Kessel, who had been on pace for a career year, then went silent, only posting 7 points, including 3 goals, over the season's last 16 games. As the main offensive engine on this team, him going silent meant they could no longer outscore their shoddy defense. The result was a miserable 12-game stretch to close out the year, where they lost 10 games, completely falling on their face and sliding out of the playoffs like a fat kid down a water slide. They ended the year 22nd in the league and 9 points behind the Detroit Red Wings for the last spot in the playoffs, nowhere close to qualifying. A finish like this should have spelled doom for management and the coaching staff, especially in a media market like Toronto. But surprisingly, both Nonis and Carlyle held onto their roles to try and bounce back next season. Carlyle even earned an extension. Good stuff. No fun fact, Josh Levo, the Canadian who now owns the KHL single-season goal record, had a cup of coffee with the Leafs this year. Alright, let's move on from this dismal year. I sure hope they bounce back. Armed with a fresh contract, his 5-year extension kicked in the offseason, and full of guile and wit, Nonis had the keys to the Leafs Ferrari and was ready to hit the gas again this offseason. Except, he did so under a new set of eyes. Brendan Shanahan was hired on April 11th, 2014 as Toronto's new president and alternate governor. Tasked with overseeing all operations, both hockey and business, a man with this kind of winning pedigree wasn't going to take systemic failure as an option. But despite last season's failure, the man with the Shanny plan took the patient route, allowing both Nonis and Carlyle to stay on. However, he did bring in a shiny new toy as assistant GM after a 9-hour conversation that must have been riveting. Honestly though, no shade there. With Shanny's blessing, Nonis and the Leafs embarked on their 2014 offseason. They kicked it off by drafting William Nylander 8th overall, a noticeable focus on skill after Burke's years of scouring the draft for physicality. Willie would have a big role with the Leafs in the future, but that's another era. Other than that, Nonis made some changes on the fringes, adding Stefan Robida, the man who would later have an island named after him, not that island, on a 3-year deal to help shore up the D. Komarov returned from the KHL, enticed by a big deal, and Jake Gardiner signed an extension. Nonis also let Boland and Kuhlman walk. This team still had Phil the Thrill, Lupul, Phaneuf, Bozak, Bernier, Reimer. These guys are ready to run it back and show that last season's ending was just unlucky. And, stop me if you've heard this before, the Leafs started the year hot. A December 6-game winning streak saw the Leafs sitting with a pretty sterling 19-9-3 record, 6th in the East and the 2nd most goals in the conference. This offense could fucking turn it on sometimes. But ugly defense once again reared its head under Carlyle's regime, and the offense cooled off, resulting in a stretch where they lost 7-9, a few of them nasty blowouts, and by that point, Shanahan had seen enough. He saw that this team had probably reached its apex, and it's not great when your prime means you're maybe competing for 8th in the East. So Shanahan axed Carlyle and decided the time was ripe to scorch the fields like the Russians when Napoleon strolled in. The dream of making the playoffs was basically pronounced dead, with all their team's attention focused on the future. A new coach, Peter Horacek, bought into this as the team won only 9 of the remaining 42 games, bottoming out to 4th last in the league. I mean, I sure hope Horacek bought into that. That glistening run also included an 11-game losing streak. By the end of the year, the Leafs had only won 30 games, most of them before 2015 had even started, bringing us full circle here. This Leafs era began with a depressing 30-win season and it ended with another 30-win season. And the fans were finally starting to make their frustrations known. They tossed jerseys on the ice, Toronto's 13-year sellout streak ended, and fan favorite David Clarkson was shipped off for the floating corpse of Nathan Horton. Alright, that last one wasn't so bad. And that's it. I'm sorry guys. I know the theme of this failure to launch is that it was fun at times, but there was nothing fun about this year. The only thing I liked about it was that sweet Morgan Riley goal, but most of us fans were completely checked out by that point. Shanahan cleared house at the end of the season, firing the coaching staff and the management group aside from Kyle Dubas. The team then began the painful process of selling off assets, including our boy Phil the Thrill, who would finally lift Lord Stanley next season. The scorched earth rebuild was underway, and this era was as dead as Arthur Morgan. Corsi isn't the be-all, end-all of analyzing hockey teams, but possessing the puck and controlling the play does matter, and these Leafs fans and teams learned how hard it is to consistently win when you're swimming upstream over the years. Management's commitment to these heavy, slower players really punished them, and led to these teams getting consistently outplayed. But they also consistently outplayed the analytics, scoring goals at an above-average league rate and fielding players that the fans really brought into. Phil Kessel was a true game breaker who played a significant portion of his prime in the six. Lupul had his best years here, JVR showed real promise, Kadri dazzled with his soft hands, unreal skill, and fire in his heart. Phaneuf laid some devastating hits and played with real fucking compassion. But the pieces never added up due to coaching, outdated management ideas, and just not enough skill throughout the lineup. Ultimately, no matter how fun these Leafs teams were, and I really think they had some fun stretches and cool players, they were stuck in that murky middle. A fairly competent team who could battle for a fringe playoff spot, but wasn't a real contender. Riley and Kadri were good picks, but Burke's and Nonis' drafts utterly failed to fill the Leafs pipeline with prospects that could make a difference. And with that, this Leafs era ended with a whimper. A complete failure to launch that teased quasi-competitiveness but never really looked like a real thing. Their failures did, however, allow them to start stockpiling the players that would kickstart the next Leafs competitive era. It's crazy to think that throughout this whole Leafs era, there was just a young Austin Matthews, just tearing it up in Arizona, not knowing where his future lies. A huge thanks to anybody who made it to the end with me. More videos are coming your way, so feel free to help me out by dropping your failure to launch ideas in the comments below. You know, franchises that got stuck in a murky middle or rebuild. I'm open to suggestions.